who has tuned into this session, and we know that many of you will be not only tuning in via Attendify but watching on YouTube as well, and we thank you for that, and hopefully you'll enjoy the conversation for the next half hour. I've had a very, very quick catch up with Lord Michael Hastings, because we actually had a conversation in person a number of years ago, and I can recall that conversation with pleasure, and I'm looking forward to this one now. So Lord Hastings, you're obviously in the UK at the moment, is that right?
I am indeed. North of London, yes.
North of London, yeah. And so look, here we are. Technology is able to connect us across the world, across time zones, and we can have a chat. And I think the short title for our chat was about learning and life going through. So I'll ask you just a very first general question, just to sort of see where you're at. I mean, 2020 was a year like no other that we've sort of expected. I know that for myself, I was actually in Rwanda when we got word that the lockdowns were about to happen in the middle of March, and had to make snap decisions about where I went back, and I finished up back in Sydney. For you, has the 2020 disrupted any major plans?
Well, I think for all of us, lockdowns have brought a mix of fear and fury and opportunity and redecision. Fear because the great unknown descended upon us. I'm not a fearful of meeting other people person, but many are, and many people step to one side. I've even come across people in the community where I live who'd rather step into bramble bushes full of spikes and nettles and sting themselves to bits when they're wearing shorts for fear that I might be carrying the coronavirus. The sense of extremes has been, in some cases, ridiculous. Fury, too, because this has been a year, especially for those of us who are of a Black African Caribbean background, where the unparalleled public murder of George Floyd led to exceptional and necessary protests in every corner of the world. And from that, multiple exposures of the extreme and unexpected, and most of the world hadn't realized, extent of still pernicious, violent discrimination in America. But then it brings out the fact that actually, and I say this conscious of however many people are watching us, that even though what we've thought of the US has been bad, violent killing of Black people is worst in Brazil more than any other place in the world, followed by South Africa, followed by America. So when we're talking about this deeply uncomfortable, fury-making, violent and despairing episode in our 2020, America is not alone, and it's not the worst. We're inclined to think it is, but it's not the worst. And even here in the UK, we have unacceptable cases of police brutality, unacceptable cases. So that's fear and fury. But then what's opportunity been? Thank goodness for me, maybe for you, Stephen. I know you're in Australia. I was used to traveling the world nonstop for the last 13, 14 years in my role at KPMG. And thank goodness this year, I mean, I've actually had 6 overseas trips this year. 5 of them before lockdown, 1 of them during, with a little break to Greece, which was very nice. So I just kind of feel privileged. I've had 6 overseas trips already this year. Many people haven't been anywhere. I've been a long way. I've been in South Africa. I've been in Zimbabwe. I've been in the Caribbean. I've been in Greece. So I'm very grateful. And of course, I've also been in fascinating European cities. I'm very grateful. But I've also seen this year be a year when everybody's talking about restarting, relearning, and resetting. And that's a good thing, because it's only when we're forced to slow down and rethink do we think. Otherwise, life just glides by. And especially, and I know we're going to come on to talk about education in various aspects and learning in various aspects, we've had more opportunity to learn off our iPads, phones, laptops, whatever stuff we've got than ever before. We've had more opportunity to be calm and quiet than ever before. Have we taken advantage of it? That's the challenge.
Okay. Now you've raised multiple really interesting topics there. I'm going to go on to the one that the Fury one. I mean, the rest of the world, we watched with horror what was happening, and I guess you've raised some really interesting points. It did touch off some of the very difficult history in Australia going through, and created a lot of moral questions around the time of, is a protest a good thing, a bad thing in the middle of a pandemic? I mean, some very difficult ones. What would you want a new generation, perhaps people who are a school age, primary school age, to take from 2020 in terms of that fury? What would you be hoping that the young kids who've watched that, have now heard about the Black Lives Matter, who, when they watched the American election, heard reporters standing in Black Lives Matter Plaza, what would you hope that they take away from this into the future? A new
Well,
generation.
I suppose the first thing is the realization that it takes a very long time for a majority population to wake up to the severity of the injustice around it. And it was that famous quote, which even President-elect Biden has quoted from Martin Luther King Jr., which is the arc of history, the long arc of history, ultimately bends towards justice. And oh boy, I mean, we're similar ages, Brian. I'm probably younger than you. I hope I am. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. But you and I will remember the "I Have a Dream" speech, even though I was but a child, less than 10 years of age, on a grainy black and white television. We remember those grand state occasions where there was a vision set out for equality, opportunity, for justice. But look how long it's taken for even elements of that to be possible. For a woman, you've had a woman prime minister in Australia. We've had two women prime ministers here in the UK. There's always been a woman queen. Of course, that's the sort of goes with the territory. But of course, in the United States, the idea of a woman in the White House, goodness me. So that's a big step forward. A black woman, a woman of some Indian and also other origin. Fantastic that these changes are as dynamic as they possibly can be. However, that said, changing the vice president, getting vocal about the issues, doesn't necessitate that there is a dramatic shift in behaviors. And even in the course of the last 2 weeks, there's been another incident of police killing of a black man in the streets of a US city. Two police just literally took him out face to face. Now, they would argue that he was a potential danger. I would contend, looking at the evidence, they could have tasered him, they could have shot him in the legs, shoot him in the chest. Unnecessary. So there was the long arc of history, the long arc. I want this generation to remember how difficult it is to achieve change. One of your great heroes, one of my great heroes, William Wilberforce, who contended in this country for the end of slavery, fought his way through Parliament to achieve things. 44 years of contentious arguments, dying 3 days later after England finally woke up to the horrors of what it was doing, let alone the Dutch and the Spanish. Now, just think of 44 years. How many politicians ever do anything for 44 years, let alone 4 years? So this generation, and this is the point I really make, see, this generation needs to learn change doesn't happen by a click, a flick, or a like. That's what happens on Instagram or Twitter, but it doesn't happen in the real world. And I remind people of this other one. I have to say this to you. I'm a great fan of Barack Obama. Did many things wonderful, but didn't do some things at all. But here's the first thing he ever did as president of the United States. Literally, the first executive order that he signed day one in the White House, to close Guantanamo Bay within 12 months. Well, we're 12 years on from that executive order, and Guantanamo Bay is still open. So the complexity of dealing with difficult issues where law is involved and transformation of the mind, the heart, and procedures are involved is not easy. Young people, wake up to dedication.
Okay, now I'm going to take sort of your comments there and now weave them back into an education theme, because for me, the week of the lockdowns occurring in the middle of March, I was in Rwanda. And, I've returned back to the comfort of Australia, and it might be a fortress at the moment in terms of very difficult for outsiders to come in and for us to leave, but it's a safe country. Rwanda, the schools closed in the middle of March, as did many sub-Saharan and other African schools, because that was the government's correct response at the time to make sure that their population was safe. But they haven't opened yet, and there's no set plans for some of those countries to have a way out of the closure of schools because of the reliance on that model of teacher out the front and no technology to support anything different going through. Is there a moral imperative now for countries where, even in the midst of all the confusions of lockdown, we still have an education system happening, when we know that possibly up to half of the world's children are no longer in schools because of the pandemic? I mean, that's not an issue that's making the news.
No, it's not. And I'm an ambassador for the Global Partnership for Education. Julia Gillard, your former Prime Minister, is the chair of it. And we actually met last week and virtually and committed ourselves not just to the refunding of the GPE, but also to the campaigning for those most essential learning realities for the most poorest and needy and sometimes most fertile minds there are. I am a governor of the M-Pesa Academy in Nairobi. We reopened our school 4 weeks ago. We have had some COVID cases. There were some people on the immediate rush of close the school down, 900 children, send them all back to the villages and communities from which they came from. I and a number of others argued no, because the actual number of cases was, 5, frankly. We can act to contain. Likely life loss amongst children is negligible, non-existent. Most people, 95% of people in the world, recover from COVID within 4 days. Even Donald Trump did. The reality is that this is a virus that is serious for those for whom it is serious, that is, with significant underlying respiratory and health conditions, but also for the severely isolated elderly. It is serious for people of other ages, but it's a recoverable disorder for most other people. And we need to prepare ourselves to live with it, as we have done with so many other viruses and diseases. It is a natural fact of the natural world that disease circulates consistently. And we need to not be shy of that fact. But I say one other thing, which is delicate, which is none of us should pretend we can live forever. We're not going to live forever. We all know in the back of our minds, we pray that we will not die of some horrendous disease or terrible accident or painful, uncomfortable disorder. We don't know. And there is a need in a society, Western society, where you are, Steve, where I am, maybe where many of our viewers are this evening, where we're so used to getting what we want instantaneously, constantly, and always on tap. Well, death waits for no man. We need to be ready to treasure life every day, ready for death, sensitive and sensible about risk, creative about keeping ourselves safe, but not foolish about reducing the prospects of another generation to zero. I'm for open schools.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move into that school scenario then. One of the things that I've actually quite enjoyed in the last month is it's the early phase of a remote learning context for people who have been unable to access their normal school again, going through. And one of the things that strikes me there is that people are craving face-to-face school for all the right reasons, for the human connections, for seeing their friends and the like. I guess one of the questions moving forward now is should we be paying far more attention to connection and well-being in the school systems, no matter what they are, whether they're face-to-face, whether they're virtual? Do you have a perspective on that concept of connection and I guess empathy and understanding, which would also go back to that Fury point that you made initially as well? But I'd love to hear your thoughts on connection, well-being, and wellness as being a key component of schooling or education into the future, possibly.
Well, I was sent a very interesting little LinkedIn piece just 2 weeks ago, what I learned in school. And it says, what I learned in school was how to multiply 8 by 7 and what H2O stands for. What I didn't learn in school that I wished I'd learned in school, the importance of mental health, self-care, emotional regulation, mindfulness, self-esteem, reframing negative thoughts, the importance of sleep, managing personal finance, emotional regulation. Those things are so, they're the stuff about life. And schools should be centers in which, because life happens, like it or not, it just does, children come to school carrying the realities of what they've come from and what they may either fear or look forward to going back to. And that life is happening in the school. Relationships between children, relationships with teachers, and insights and awarenesses. The need for our education systems to recognize that in a world where actually, ironically, we can get more knowledge from our phones than we can from our teachers formally, we can get more knowledge on an evening surfing the net than we could in a week of sitting in a classroom. But the truth is, most of us don't do that. We surf the net for rather irrelevances and trivia. But where we can get that, schools need to become more centers where connection is facilitated. And that connection needs to be both emotional and physical and spiritual. It needs to also be about hard facts and realities, but it's also going to be a place of understanding. You know, I've spoken in many what you may best call difficult urban schools in and around London and the southeast of the UK. And when I hold up the latest iPhone whatever or Samsung whatever and ask the delighted 200 in front of me, what do you really use your phone mainly for? They'll tell you it's not actually messaging, it's photo swapping. Photo swapping. So then you tell them that the piece of kit that allows the photo swapping is a very rare earth mineral found in mines in the Congo, dug out by enslaved children. Yes, of course, by paid adults, but enslaved children who pick up but pennies in their destitution to give you the opportunity to send a dumb picture to someone else. Do you know what the interesting thing is, Steve? In every single case where I have then asked the gathered young, does that knowledge change your desire to upgrade and to get the latest slick possible phone? The answer is a massive, consistent yes. Because unless this amazing young generation knows that its liberties are other people's enslavements, they won't get the connection. So connection goes beyond our connected physical presences and emotional presences into connecting our minds with the things we consider to be our liberties and where they come from and who's paid the price for that. And when we're a bit more awake, we can think about coltan and that amazing mineral dug out of the Congolese under earth so that someone can send a dumb picture.
Okay, lots of very profound comments there, and I'll look forward to listening again to note some of those down. I know that one of the things that continues to constrain teachers in a classroom is the knowledge of standardized testing. The fear of what if it's, in many cases, I hate to say this, it's not so much about the students, it's more the fear of the adult, and people's perception of them that drives them down a certain road. I know that ironically many school boards, councils have had, a 2020 vision statement for the last decade or so, looking forward to 2020, never imagining for a second that 2020 was going to be actually opening up a number of new insights in fresh ways. What would you chuck out of the old system in order to enable a new system to come? And I guess you can speak as a person involved with Regent as well. So.
Well, here's the thing. Steve, when you and I were young, wasn't life simple? So simple. I mean, we would, well, certainly I remember my parents, they used to dress up so nicely to go on an aeroplane, to go somewhere. And the theatre and the cinema, you dressed up very formally because this was a great occasion. We had a sense of the pauses of life because we didn't have everything. Because we didn't have everything and it wasn't at the end of our fingertips, life was simple. And we didn't know half the things were going on in the world because we couldn't see it. Well, isn't life complicated right now? It's so complex. And as it's so complex and so interwoven and so global, and along comes, putting coronavirus to one side, along comes artificial intelligence and robotics and data analytics. Oh my gosh. Systems. Well, in this complexity, here's what I think is really important. See, our curriculum for schools in the main, of course there are exceptions, but in the main doesn't help today's generation understand complexity and understand how you deal with complexity. Generally speaking, we don't teach analytical thinking. We don't teach active continuous learning. We don't teach complex problem solving. We don't teach critical thinking and analysis. Now, I've just read you the top 4 of the World Economic Forum's 2025 skills list. Oh. We teach none of those things. And yet young people will emerge into a world where, frankly, that matters. So I think we need to look hard at the aspects of our curriculums, which can be done, dare I say it, more digitally. There's a lot of, we need maths, for goodness sakes, everybody needs to know what fundamental figures are. But do we need all the gradiness of some aspects of maths? I did algebra at school. I haven't a clue when I ever used it. And I've got 62 with a ton of life around me. So I'm not sure I need it. But I'd much rather know how to think analytically so that I can deal with the tensions and complexities before me. I had to vote last night in Parliament on the UK's Internal Markets Bill. Oh my word, talk about complexity. And the weight of argument that took us until 11:15 at night last night before we voted, that's no easy thing. People think politics is just a swanning around game. No, this stuff requires mind-twisting intelligence, which is the application of all that every one of us has got between our ears. So that's what I'd say. Look, strip out the stuff that the enabled digital world makes easier. Put in the stuff that allows young men and women to know how to manage the complexity that is ahead of them, to think analytically. And here's the big question I ask my students at Regent's University and also at Utah State University. Not what are you studying, because that's what you know. What is it you don't know? And let's have a good analysis of what we don't know. And then in studying what we don't know, we can fill in the gaps.
Okay, now you've touched on, again, many interesting points. the average teacher, I would say, understands totally what you've just said, but yet is fearful of that change. And that fear often comes down to the systems that we have created worldwide have created this inequity, have created all of these issues because we can't easily walk away. Now let's marry the world of politics into the conversation now, because to a degree, until the bureaucrats and politicians start to understand some of the significant shifts that need to occur in a classroom in order for this new world of opportunity to emerge and these new competencies, what's the message that needs to be said to the world of politics, the world of the bureaucrats who are running our systems? What would you see? What would you say?
Well, hands off to a certain extent. You know, in the same way that 2020 has been about grainy health and all that goes with it, education should be about grainy learning, and civil servants and academics sitting in ivory towers, well, probably in ivory bedrooms, houses now, as they're all locked down, they should not be determining the direction of educational insight. But that said, teachers and head teachers need to be on their mettle. And I'm sure you know as well as I do, Steve, that it's because of the way automated teaching systems have become more normative, as in given curriculum from governments, teachers can, not have, can be more lazy. And in being more lazy, as in just doing what the curriculum says and following the model, this isn't preparing young people for the future. This is holding on to the knowledge of the past. So there's a need for teachers to be excited by learning. I mean, here's the strange thing, Steve. Many people criticize me for this, but I'll say it. I love advertisements. Show me a newspaper, a magazine, go to a cinema when you can, I don't turn off the ads. I watch them. Why do I watch the ads? Why do I read the ads? Because I'm curious. Companies have paid billions for these things. And they're teaching us something. They're telling us something about products and services, about ideas, about information. If we switch off the things we don't like, how do we learn about anything? Curiosity is so important. And I need to be curious. You need to be curious. We need to be curious so we can discover. And it's only when we discover things out of curiosity is our life brought forward in our mind. And that's where meaning happens.
Okay, now I'm watching the clock here because we're going to probably have time for one more answer only. Let's bring it down to the child now, the child of 2020. The child that's being confused by the world, has just is feeling anxious, does not know where they're going ahead. What would you hope lies before them in the next decade? What would you love? What are the issues that we should be helping them understand in this complex world? So this is the world now for a bit of visioning as we finish off.
Well, I think, Steve, conscious that we have about 1.5 minutes to go, what I would say to any young people watching, or at least to those who communicate with them, is please encourage imagination. This is not just about arts and theatre and cinema and digital stuff. Imagination is what causes us to innovate, to create things. Here we are waiting on someone to come up with a vaccine that will work. Well, that takes a lot of imagination to get the chemicals right. We need imagination, and we need to encourage this deep desire to use this tool called a phone for something special, precious, and significant. Get out there and discover, and begin by understanding nature and wildlife. One, because we need to have an environmentally sensitive young population. Yes, we do, Greta Thunberg et al. But what about understanding the impacts of all of that in greater detail, in the same way that young people will follow influencers? Well, how about following people with impact, not just influencers, and understand? So I suppose what I'm really saying in that, Steve, is here is a generation entering into the great beyond called tomorrow, with more complexity and turmoil than we've ever seen before, but more knowledge, more information, more opportunity, more giftedness, more smart learning, more potential. and more opportunity themselves to be heroic. Find out what you don't know and learn it.
Oh, look, now, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful conversation as we finish right now. Okay. So, thank you so much. That was a great conversation. I could go for another hour or so. Yeah. Yeah. No,
Well,
thank
we'll
you.
see you.
Yeah. No, well, I will communicate with you via email again. And when I next
Yes,
get back to the UK, I'd love to catch up again. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
indeed. Take care.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
You too. Bless you. All right.
Bye.